The phone rang at 5:07 in the morning, and before I even reached for it, I already knew, in the specific way that a mother's body knows things before her mind catches up, that something was being done to my house. I was 67 years old, and I had been a light sleeper since the year my husband Thomas died, which was 2018, which was the year everything got quieter, in a way that was not peace, but absence. The darkness in the bedroom was complete. My hand found the phone on the nightstand before my eyes were fully open, and the number on the screen was one I recognized as belonging to Darnell Hayes, who is the night security coordinator for the camera monitoring service I had installed 2 years prior, and whose calls I had never received at 5 in the morning, because nothing had ever happened at 5 in the morning that required his call, until this morning. "Mrs. Fontaine," Darnell said, and his voice had the specific quality of someone who is maintaining a professional calm that is costing him something. "I'm sorry to wake you. We have activity at the property, multiple vehicles. It looks like a crew, heavy equipment." I sat up. The bedroom was cold in the way of a December morning in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I had the specific clarity of a person who has been sleeping but is now fully awake and understanding exactly what is being told to her. "How many vehicles?" I said. 3 trucks. One of them has a trailer with what looks like a skid steer on it. And there's a 4th vehicle, a sedan. And it was the first to arrive, about 20 minutes ago. A sedan arriving first. I did not need to ask whose sedan. "Darnell," I said, "has the automatic alert gone to the police station?" "Yes, ma'am. That went out the moment the motion sensors picked up the vehicles on the property. And I'm holding on to notify your attorney as per your standing instructions. Do you want me to make that call now?" "Make it now," I said. "Call Raymond Park. Tell him what you've told me. Tell him I'm on my way." I hung up. I turned on the lamp. I looked at the bedroom, Thomas's photograph on the dresser, the quilt his mother had made, the house that I had lived in for 38 years, and I thought, so this is how she chooses to do it. Not in a courtroom, not with a forged document. At 5 in the morning in December, with a skid steer on a trailer, and a demolition crew who does not know whose name is on the deed. My name is Adele Christine Fontaine. I am 67 years old, and I have been a registered nurse for 35 years, a widow for 6, and the owner of this house. The house at 1847 Camellia Avenue in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, for 38 years, under my name alone, in a deed that was never amended and never needed to be. My daughter-in-law's name is Portia Whitmore Fontaine, and she is 39 years old, and she has been trying in various ways to get me out of this house for the past 2 years. Tonight she had apparently decided that the most efficient method was to simply demolish it. Let me tell you something about 35 years of nursing before I tell you what happened that morning, because the nursing is part of the account. A nurse at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center in 1985 is a person who has learned, in the specific way that clinical work teaches, that everything depends on documentation, preparation, and the willingness to be the person who addresses the thing that everyone else is managing not to see. I have watched physicians avoid the conversation that needed to happen. I have watched families convince themselves that the patient is improving when the patient is not. I have watched the specific human tendency to manage difficulty by managing not to look at it directly. I have never had that tendency myself. I find it impractical. 35 years of nursing gave me 3 things that are directly relevant to what happened on the morning of December 14th. Documentation habits that are reflexive rather than considered. The specific clarity of a person who has sat with many difficult situations and has learned that clarity serves better than comfort, and the absolute certainty that when something is wrong, the correct response is to address it rather than to wait for it to resolve. Portia had assessed me as diminished by grief and by age. She had not accounted for the nursing. She did not know about the cameras. She did not know about the direct police link. She did not know about Raymond Park. She did not know very much about me at all, despite having been my son Marcus's wife for 7 years. This would turn out to be her most significant error. I need to tell you about this house before I tell you what happened in the driveway that morning, because this house is not just a building, and the account is not complete without understanding what it has been and what it cost. Thomas and I bought the house at 1847 Camellia Avenue in 1986, the year after we married, the year after I graduated from nursing school and began working at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center. The price was $94,000, which was the sum of everything we had saved in 3 years of working and saving with the specific discipline of people who grew up without and have decided that without will not be their permanent condition. Thomas was a high school history teacher. I was a nurse. Between us, we made what 2 people with good jobs in Winston-Salem made in 1986, which was enough to buy a house and not much more. We did not travel. We did not eat at restaurants on weekdays. We did not buy new cars when the old ones still ran. We saved and we paid the mortgage, and over 32 years we paid it off. And when Thomas died in 2018, the house was ours outright, which means when he died it became mine outright, with no mortgage and no encumbrance, and my name alone on the deed, as it had always been, because the mortgage had been in my name, because my credit score was the better one, and the bank had suggested we structure it that way. The house is not large, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen that Thomas renovated himself in 2009, with the specific patience of a man who learned from YouTube tutorials and who did it correctly on the 3rd attempt. Her a backyard with a garden that I have maintained since 1987, where the tomatoes and the beans and the collard greens grow every summer, and where Thomas and I spent our Sunday mornings for 32 years, with coffee and the newspaper and the specific quiet of a relationship that has found its rhythm. Thomas died in February, heart attack. He was 61 years old, and he was in the kitchen making breakfast when it happened. And I was the one who found him, and I want to say that the specific quality of that finding, the particular way a space changes when the person who gave it its meaning is no longer in it, is something that I have been learning to live with for 6 years, and that I am still learning. After Thomas died, Marcus began making suggestions. Not immediately. In the beginning, he was a good son, a present and helpful and sad in the way of a man who loved his father, and I was grateful for his presence. But gradually, over the months following the death, the suggestions began. The suggestions were about the house. The house was too large for one person. The house was in a neighborhood that was changing. The house required maintenance that I should not have to manage alone. Wouldn't it be better, more comfortable, more sensible to sell the house and use the proceeds to live somewhere smaller, somewhere easier, somewhere that did not carry the weight of all that memory? I said no. I said it clearly, multiple times, over multiple conversations, and then I said it to Portia when she took over the campaign after Marcus's first 3 attempts had failed. Portia's approach was different from Marcus's. Marcus argued practicality. Portia argued concern. She expressed worry about my independence, my safety, my ability to maintain the property, my isolation. She suggested, not once, but on several occasions, that my grief had affected my judgment and that I should perhaps consult someone about my mental state before making permanent decisions about significant assets. The suggestion that my grief had affected my judgment was the moment I called Raymond Park for the first time. Raymond Park is a real estate and estate planning attorney who had represented Thomas and me since 1992. He is 71 years old and has the specific quality of an attorney who has seen everything and who finds very few things genuinely surprising. He reviewed the deed, confirmed that it was in my name alone, and would not be subject to any claim from Marcus or Portia during my lifetime, and advised me on the specific legal protections available to me as the sole owner of the property. He also suggested, when I told him about Portia's behavior and my concerns about what she might attempt, that I consider installing a security system. Not just a doorbell camera, he said, something comprehensive, with a monitoring service and a direct link to law enforcement. I want to tell you about the saving, because the saving is part of the house, and the house is not fully visible without it. In 1987, the year after we moved in, Marcus was born. I took 6 weeks of maternity leave, unpaid, because 1987 was before the Family and Medical Leave Act, and Thomas covered the mortgage with his teaching salary alone. We had a savings cushion of approximately $2,000. I went back to work at 6 weeks, and Marcus went to a woman named Ruth Carter who watched infants in her home. We paid for Ruth Carter. We paid the mortgage. We paid for Marcus's clothes, his doctor visits, his school supplies, and eventually his college tuition, which we began saving for when he was 4 years old, with the specific logic of people who know that what you do not start, you will not finish. Thomas taught school for 32 years at the same high school for the last 24. He knew every maintenance worker by name. He went to every sporting event, even the sports he did not enjoy, because he believed that a teacher who shows up for his students outside the classroom is a different kind of teacher. He received a district teaching award 3 times. He mentored 11 student teachers. He died at 61, which is young by any reasonable measure, and on which he would have found deeply inconvenient had he known it was coming. I had the system installed 6 weeks later. I want to tell you about Portia fairly, because I am not a person who deals in unfairness, and because the account should be honest, even about the people it does not flatter. Portia Whitmore grew up in Charlotte, the middle child of a family that had money in the visible way that some families have money. The house, the cars, the schools, the specific social fluency of people who have not had to think about whether they could afford something since before they were born. She is intelligent, genuinely, operationally intelligent, the kind of intelligence that assesses situations quickly and identifies opportunities within them. She has a degree in business administration from UNC Charlotte, and she works in real estate development, which means she understands property values and market conditions, and the specific arithmetic of what a house in Winston-Salem at current prices produces if it is sold. She married Marcus in 2017 at a ceremony that was lovely in its way, and I was glad for him because he was happy and because she was, in the early years, someone who seemed to bring him genuine happiness. I want to say this clearly. I did not dislike Portia because she married my son. I did not dislike her because she was from Charlotte, or because she had grown up with money, or because she had opinions about real estate. I began to have concerns about Portia because of the specific things she said and did after Thomas died, when she apparently decided that Thomas's death had created an opportunity. The opportunity, as she appears to have understood it, a 67-year-old widow, living alone in a 3-bedroom house worth considerably more than what Thomas and I paid for it in 1986, who could be persuaded or pressured or legally maneuvered into relinquishing the property. The house, at current market values, is worth approximately $480,000. I know this because a realtor friend gave me an informal appraisal at my request, and because Portia had a formal appraisal done, which I discovered because the appraiser, who was professional but clearly not briefed on the family situation, left a voicemail on my home phone rather than Portia's cell, and I listened to the message before I understood what it was. $480,000. This is what Portia saw when she looked at 1847 Camellia Avenue. For she did not see 38 years of Thomas and Adele Fontaine. She did not see the kitchen Thomas renovated 3 times. She did not see the garden or the Sunday mornings or the specific weight of a life built in a place over decades. She saw $480,000, and she began to plan accordingly. The planning included, I would later discover through Raymond Park's investigation, the following: a consultation with a different attorney about the possibility of seeking guardianship over me on the grounds of diminished capacity, 2 conversations with a contractor about renovation costs and demolition timelines, and a series of communications with Marcus about the proceeds from a hypothetical sale and how they might be structured. And the guardianship consultation went nowhere because there was no evidence of diminished capacity, and the attorney, who was more ethical than Portia had apparently anticipated, told her as much. The contractor conversations produced the demolition crew that arrived at my property at 5:07 in the morning on a December Thursday. The communications with Marcus, this is the part I find saddest, and the part I want to address last, because it requires honesty about my son that is painful. Marcus knew. My son, Marcus Thomas Fontaine, is 42 years old, and he is, I want to be precise here, a man who is not wicked, but who has made a specific kind of peace with the wickedness of someone he loves, which is its own form of participation. Marcus grew up in the house at 1847 Camellia Avenue. He grew up with Thomas's patient instruction in the backyard garden, and my specific standard for academic work, and the particular quality of a household, where love was expressed through presence and consistency and the daily practice of showing up. He was a good child who became a good student, who became a man with a good career. He is an engineer, works for a structural firm in Greensboro, and for most of his adult life, he has been someone I was genuinely proud of. The pride has not gone away. It is just complicated now by what I know. Marcus did not initiate the campaign against me. This is the distinction I have had to make, because the distinction is real. The campaign was Portia's idea, Portia's architecture, Portia's execution. Marcus's participation was the specific participation of a man who has decided that keeping peace with his wife is more important than maintaining the clarity of his own moral position. He did not tell me about the guardianship consultation. He did not tell me about the contractor conversations. When I asked him, directly and twice, whether Portia was making plans regarding the house without my knowledge, he said no. He said no, and he was lying, and he knew he was lying, and I knew he was lying, and we both knew the other one knew, and we proceeded as though none of this were true, because that is what we had been doing for 2 years. This is the hardest part of the account. Not Portia's ambition. I understand ambition. I understand the arithmetic of $480,000. I understand how a person can look at an old woman living alone and see an opportunity rather than a human being. What I understand less is how a son watches this happening and says nothing and does nothing and calls his mother twice a week to ask how she is feeling. He called me twice a week, every Tuesday and Saturday, regular as a schedule, and we talked about his work and my garden and the grandchildren I see twice a year and the family news and everything except the thing that was actually happening. I did not call him the morning of the 5 a.m. call. I called Raymond Park, and I drove to the house, and I let the cameras and the police and 38 years of building something do what they were designed to do. Marcus found out what happened the way everyone eventually finds out, what has been happening behind their careful not looking, from someone else after the fact, when the consequences had already arrived. Let me tell you about the security system, because the system is the turning point of this account, and it deserves a proper introduction. Raymond Park recommended it in the spring of 2 years ago. He was specific, not just cameras, but a comprehensive monitoring system with redundant coverage, a professional monitoring service with 24-hour staffing, and, most critically, a direct integration with the local law enforcement non-emergency dispatch system. The integration meant that when the motion sensors on the property detected activity outside of programmed parameters, essentially any significant movement on the property during nighttime hours, an automatic alert would go to 2 places simultaneously. The monitoring service, which would immediately reach out to me and to Raymond, and the Winston-Salem Police Department's non-emergency line, which would log the alert and dispatch a patrol unit to investigate. You want them to know something is happening before anyone can claim it's already done, Raymond had said. Property law has a concept called adverse possession. You can't use it in a case like this because you're clearly in possession, but the principle applies. The goal of any unauthorized action on your property is to create a fait accompli. The system is designed to prevent the fait accompli. I had listened carefully, and I had asked questions, and I had understood. I was a nurse for 35 years, and I have the specific precision with process that nursing installs. You follow the protocol. You document everything. You know what you are doing and why. and you do not deviate from the protocol because the protocol exists for a reason. The installation took 3 days. The technician, a man named Victor, who was patient and thorough, placed cameras at every point of ingress and egress on the property, at the 4 corners of the house, along the fence line, and at a height that made tampering with the cameras, without being recorded by a different camera, essentially impossible. He placed motion sensors along the driveway and the perimeter. He ran the monitoring software integration and tested it twice. I had paid for the system in full, in cash, from the account that is in my name alone. I had also asked Raymond to document in a signed and notarized letter my mental competence at the time of the purchase. The letter confirmed that I had presented with full capacity, had made the purchase of my own free will, and with complete understanding of its purpose, and had specifically stated that the purpose was to protect my property from unauthorized access by any party, including family members. The letter was dated. It was filed with Raymond's office. It was exactly the document that would make any subsequent claim of incapacity, any suggestion that I had not been in a sound mind when I installed the system, impossible to sustain. Raymond had thought of this. He is 71 years old and has seen everything. I want to tell you about something Victor said when he finished the installation, because it has stayed with me. He was packing up his equipment, and he looked at the property, the cameras at the corners, the sensors along the fence line, and he said, "Mrs. Fontaine, and I install these systems all the time. Most people get them after something bad happens. You got it before. That is smart." I thanked him. I thought, I am not in the category of people who prepare for something hypothetical. I am preparing for something that is already in motion, that I cannot see fully but can sense, the way a nurse senses when a patient is declining before the monitors show it, because you know how things develop and you recognize the early signals. The system was not insurance against something hypothetical. It was preparation for something I believed was coming. I just did not know when. On the morning of the 5 a.m. call, the system worked exactly as designed. The motion sensors detected the vehicles at 5:02 a.m. The alert went out at 5:03 a.m., simultaneously to Darnell Hayes at the monitoring service and to the Winston-Salem Police Department's non-emergency line. Darnell called me at 5:07 a.m. The first patrol unit arrived at the property at 5:19 a.m. The second unit arrived at 5:24 a.m. The demolition crew, 5 men, hired by a contractor named Belfour Building Services, arrived to find police already on the property when their trucks pulled into the driveway. Portia arrived in her sedan 11 minutes before the crew. She arrived at 5:02 a.m., which is why she was the first person the motion sensors detected. She was there to supervise. She was not there in any legal capacity. She did not have a demolition permit. She did not have any document authorizing her to direct activity on the property at 1847 Camellia Avenue. She had been standing in the driveway for 17 minutes when the police arrived. I drove to Camellia Avenue in December darkness, and I want to tell you what that drive was like, because the drive is part of the account. I have driven that route thousands of times. From my current apartment, I had moved to a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Winston-Salem 8 months ago, voluntarily, because I had decided that a smaller space suited my current life, and because Thomas's absence had made the large house feel different in a way I was still processing. To the house at 1847 Camellia Avenue is 14 minutes by the route I know. I drove it in December dark at 5:20 in the morning, and the city was quiet in the way that cities are quiet at that hour. The street lights still on, the occasional delivery truck, the specific emptiness of streets that are waiting for the day to begin. I drove and I thought about Thomas. I thought about him in the way that I think about him most often now, which is not with the acute grief of the first years, but with the specific ache of someone who has made a kind of peace with the absence and who carries it as a companion rather than as an open wound. I thought about what he would say if he could see what was happening at the house that morning. I think he would have been disappointed in Marcus. Thomas had high expectations of people, and specific disappointment for the people who did not meet them. Not rage, not condemnation, but the quiet withdrawal of esteem that was, in its way, more cutting than anger. He would have been unafraid of Portia. Thomas had the specific fearlessness of a man who has taught high school for 30 years and has encountered every variety of human behavior and has learned that most of it is manageable if you stay calm and know what you are dealing with. He would have approved of the cameras. He would have said, "Adele, that is exactly right." He would have been satisfied. Raymond was already at the house when I arrived. He had driven from his own home. He lives 20 minutes from the property and had arrived just before me, which told me he had gotten in the car within minutes of Darnell's call. Raymond Park, at 71 years old, in a wool coat and with his briefcase, standing in the driveway of a property he has helped protect for 30 years. I want to say something about Raymond Park. How? Because he is more than a professional relationship, and the account would not be complete without him described as he actually is. Raymond and I first met in 1992 when Thomas and I needed our wills updated after Marcus was born. We had done rudimentary wills in 1987, but had not revisited them, and Thomas read something about the importance of reviewing estate documents after a child's birth and located Raymond through a recommendation from a colleague. Raymond was 41 at the time, already with a reputation in the Winston-Salem legal community for precision and thoroughness. He has represented us on every significant legal matter since: the refinancing of the mortgage in 1998, the dispute with the contractor in 2003, Thomas's estate in 2018. He came to Thomas's funeral. He was not required to come to Thomas's funeral, and he came because Thomas had been his client for 26 years, and because Raymond Park is the kind of man who comes to funerals. When I called him after Portia's suggestion that my grief had affected my judgment, he was angry in the specific, controlled way of a man who has seen a great deal and who reserves actual anger for the things that genuinely warrant it. He said, "Adele, we are going to make sure this cannot go further than suggestions." That was when we began the process of building the legal protection, the security system, the notarized competence statement, the regular documentation of Portia's communications and behavior. He did all of this because it was his professional responsibility, and because it was the right thing to do, and I believe, because Thomas would have wanted it done. Raymond and Thomas had a specific regard for each other, the regard of two men who have been professionally connected for years and who have discovered over the years that they share certain values that are not universal. Raymond Park, at 71 years old, in a wool coat and with his briefcase, in the December dark at 5:20 in the morning. I was very glad to see him. There were 2 patrol cars on the street, and a third pulling up as I parked. The demolition crew's trucks were stopped at the entrance to the driveway. The officers had placed their vehicles in a way that blocked access. Portia's sedan was in the driveway, engine off. Portia was outside the sedan, speaking to an officer. She was, and I want to describe this accurately, composed in the way of someone who has been caught, but has not yet accepted that being caught is the end of the matter. She was explaining something. The officer was listening with the specific patience of someone who listens to a great many explanations in the course of a working day. I got out of my car. I walked to where Raymond was standing. "She's claiming your authorization," he said quietly. "She says she has a verbal authorization from you to conduct demolition." I looked at Portia across the driveway. "She does not," I said. "No," Raymond said. "She does not, and we're going to make sure everyone here understands that." I want to describe what happened in that driveway with the precision it deserves, because precision is what the moment requires, and because the precision is what makes it true, rather than simply dramatic. I walked to where Portia was standing with the officer. The officer's name was Sergeant Denise Moorfield, and she had the specific attentiveness of someone who has assessed a situation quickly and has not yet reached a final conclusion. She looked at me as I approached. "Are you Adele Fontaine?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I own this property. I did not authorize demolition. I did not authorize any activity on this property tonight or this morning or on any other occasion by anyone currently present in this driveway, except the people who installed and service my security system." Portia said, "Adele, you need to calm down." And I was "You were trying to demolish my house at 5 in the morning, I said. "That is what you were doing. The security cameras have recorded everything since you arrived, including everything that happened before the police came. The footage is currently being stored on 3 separate servers, one of which is off-site, and it has already been transmitted to my attorney." I gestured toward Raymond, who nodded once. "The footage shows your arrival at 5:02 a.m., the arrival of the demolition crew, and 17 minutes of activity on this property without authorization." Sergeant Moorfield looked at Raymond. "And you're the property owner's attorney?" "Raymond Park, Esquire," he said. He produced a business card, which he handed to the sergeant. "I've reviewed the camera footage from the monitoring service. I have access through Mrs. Fontaine's account. I also have here." He opened his briefcase and produced a folder. "A copy of the deed, which establishes Mrs. Fontaine's sole ownership, and a notarized statement of her competence and legal capacity, dated 2 years ago, which I prepared in anticipation of exactly this kind of situation." Portia had stopped trying to speak. I watched her face during Raymond's statement, and I watched the specific sequence of its expressions. The continued composure, which lasted until Raymond mentioned the competence statement. Then a shift, something that was not quite a crack, but was the precursor to one. Then a stillness. The demolition crew, to their credit, were behaving with the professional discretion of men who have arrived at a job site and found police and understand that they are not responsible for the legal situation. Their foreman, a large man with a clipboard, had come forward and was explaining to another officer that he had been contracted by a woman who had identified herself as the property owner. "She showed us a document," he said, "looked like an authorization form. Said she had legal authority to order the demolition." Sergeant Moorfield turned to Raymond. "Does Mrs. Fontaine have any family members with power of attorney or other legal authority over this property?" "No," Raymond said. "Mrs. Fontaine is the sole owner of this property and has not granted power of attorney to any person. Any document suggesting otherwise is fraudulent." The word fraudulent landed in the driveway with a specific weight. Portia said, "I want to call my attorney." "That is absolutely your right," Sergeant Moorfield said. "You can also come with me to the station while we sort this out. I need to get a statement from you about the document you provided to the demolition crew." "Am I being arrested?" "Right now, you're being asked to provide a statement," the sergeant said. "Whether the situation escalates depends on what we find out about that document. I stood in my driveway in December at 5:40 in the morning, and I watched my daughter-in-law get into a patrol car. The demolition crew's trucks pulled out of the driveway entrance and left. Raymond stood beside me. "You should know," he said, "that forging a property authorization document is a felony in North Carolina." "I know," I said. We stood there for a moment in the cold. "Did you call Marcus?" Raymond asked. "No," I said. "I didn't." The investigation took 3 weeks. I am going to tell you what it found because the findings are the factual core of what had been happening, and because the factual core matters more than the emotional overlay, and because I spent 35 years as a nurse documenting facts in a way that would hold up under scrutiny, and I apply the same standard to my own life. I want to tell you about the birthday card, because the birthday card is what makes this not merely opportunism, but something more premeditated. In March 2021, 9 months before the December incident, Portia visited the house with Marcus and the children for his birthday. I made his favorite, roasted chicken, collard greens, cornbread. After dinner, Portia produced a birthday card and asked me to sign it. I signed it. Of course I signed it. It was my son's birthday, and his wife asked me to sign the card. I did not think about it for more than 5 seconds. What I did not know was that Portia apparently photographed the card, or had photographed it previously, and that my signature on that birthday card became the source material for the forged authorization document 9 months later. The forensic analysis of the document established this: the letter formations, the pressure pattern, the specific shape of my signature, all of it lifted from a birthday card I signed at my own dinner table, while my son was in the kitchen with his children. She sat at my table and ate my food, and watched me sign a birthday card for my son, and thought, I can use that. The patience of this is what I find most troubling, when I allow myself to find it troubling. This was not spontaneous. This was planned. The document that Portia had given to Belfour Building Services was a forged authorization letter. It was formatted to appear as an official property authorization document, with what appeared to be my signature at the bottom. The document claimed that I had authorized demolition of the structure at 1847 Camellia Avenue for the purpose of new construction, and that Portia Whitmore Fontaine had been designated as my agent for the purposes of supervising the project. Forensic analysis of the document established the signature was a forgery created by tracing my actual signature from a document I had signed in 2021 in Portia's presence, a birthday card for Marcus, which Portia had asked me to sign, and which she had apparently photographed or scanned for later use. And the document itself had been created on a template designed to mimic official real estate authorization forms. The notary seal on the document was also forged. Portia was charged with forgery of an instrument, uttering a forged instrument, and attempted criminal injury to another's real property. These are felony charges in North Carolina. She was represented by an attorney from Charlotte, who was apparently a connection from her business world, and who was, this is my assessment, not a legal fact, somewhat shaken by the quality and completeness of the evidence Raymond had assembled. Marcus called me on the third day after the incident. The call was not the call I had imagined for 2 years, not an apology, not a confession, not the conversation I had been both dreading and wanting. It was a stunned call, and a man who had been managing not to look at something, and had now had the something presented to him in the specific form of criminal charges against his wife. He said, "Mom, I didn't know she was going to do that." I said, "What did you think she was going to do?" A silence. "Marcus," I said, "I am not asking you this to hurt you. I am asking you because I need to understand what happened. Did you know she was planning to demolish the house?" "She said she was working on something," he said. "She said she had a plan that would solve everything. I didn't ask for details." "You didn't ask for details," I repeated. "I should have asked," he said. "I know that." "Yes," I said, "you should have." I told him I needed time before we had any further conversation. He said he understood. I hung up the phone, and I sat in the kitchen of my apartment. And through the window, the December light was doing what December light does in North Carolina, thin and pale and honest. And I thought about the difference between the people who ask for details and the people who decide not to, and what that decision costs the people around them. Raymond told me during the investigation something that clarified the full picture in a way that I want to share, because understanding the full picture is part of understanding what happened. Portia had not simply wanted to demolish the house. The demolition was one step in a larger plan, and the larger plan is worth understanding because it explains the specific timing, 5 a.m. in December, and the specific method, a demolition crew rather than a legal process. The plan, as Raymond reconstructed it from the documents and communications his investigation produced, Portia intended to demolish the house, create the factual situation of a demolished property, and then use that factual situation, the house being gone, to initiate a legal process in which Marcus, as my son and nearest family member, would petition for control of the proceeds from the insurance claim and the sale of the vacant lot. She had calculated incorrectly that a demolished house would produce an insurance payout, plus a land value that together approached the property's current value, and that the insurance payout would be easier to redirect than the house itself, because the house has my name on the deed, but a check from an insurance company might be handled differently. She had also calculated incorrectly that the guardianship consultation she had undertaken, which had been unsuccessful, had established enough of a paper trail about my alleged diminished capacity that a petition by Marcus would be looked at sympathetically. She had also calculated, very incorrectly, that a demolition completed before sunrise would be a fait accompli that could not be undone. The calculation was wrong on every level, and I want to say specifically why it was wrong on the level that matters most to me. She had decided that I was the kind of person whose life's work could be destroyed while I slept, and that I would wake up to the destruction and accept it as irreversible. She had decided this because she had assessed me as diminished, as an old woman in grief, alone, without the resources or the clarity to protect herself. I want to say something about this assessment. I am not diminished. I am 67 years old, and I am a widow, and I live alone, and I grieve my husband, and I have made adjustments, and I have had to relearn some things, and some days are harder than others. None of this is diminishment. These are the ordinary conditions of a full human life, and they do not make me less able to understand what is happening around me, or less able to take the steps required to address it. They also did not make me less able to call Raymond Park and install a comprehensive security system with a direct police link and file a notarized statement of my legal competence. Let me tell you what was on my mind when I received that information from Raymond, because my mind is relevant here. I thought about the specific patients I had cared for over 35 years who had been treated as Portia had apparently decided to treat me, as categories rather than people. The elderly patient on the medical floor whose family had decided she could not participate in decisions about her own care, and the post-surgical patient whose daughter managed all his communications with the medical team, as though he were no longer a person capable of expressing a preference. The women, it was most often women, who had been redefined by their illness or their age or their widowhood into something less than fully human in the eyes of the people around them. I had always been the nurse who addressed this, who turned to the patient and asked what they wanted, who documented the patient's stated preferences and made sure those preferences were heard. I had done it because it was right, and because it was my professional responsibility, and because I had the specific conviction, developed over 35 years of bedside nursing, and that the category of patient does not replace the category of person. Portia had replaced the category of person with the category of elderly widow. The error was precise and it was consequential. So this is how they repay me, she had apparently believed. Did she really think I had become that senile? I have not become anything of the sort. I have become, if anything, more precise. The 35 years of nursing gave me the precision. The 6 years of widowhood gave me the patience. The 2 years of Portia's campaign gave me the specific motivation to make sure that precision and patience were in place before they were needed. They were in place. Portia accepted a plea agreement 8 months after the December morning. The terms: a guilty plea to 2 of the 3 charges, a suspended sentence, 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and restitution to Balfour Building Services for the mobilization costs they had incurred for a job that was not completed. The felony conviction, forgery of an instrument, remained on her record. The felony conviction, Raymond explained to me, has specific practical consequences. It affects her ability to work in real estate in North Carolina, where licensure requires a clean record, and where the licensing board reviewed her case and declined to renew her license for the following year. It affects any future legal proceedings in which her credibility might be relevant. It is a permanent record of what she did. I want to be honest about how I received the plea agreement news. When Raymond called to tell me the terms, I sat with it for about 20 minutes. I had maintained through 8 months of legal process the specific professional composure of a nurse in a difficult clinical situation. Clear, documented, present, not allowing the emotional layer to interfere with what needed to be done. What I had not allowed myself during those 8 months was to feel fully what had actually been done. A woman who had sat at my table, who had eaten my food, who had held my grandchildren in my presence and performed the role of family member. She had photographed my signature off a birthday card and built a plan to demolish my house while I slept. I sat with it for 20 minutes. Then I called my oldest friend, Dorothy, who has known me for 40 years, and then I told her the terms. Dorothy said, "Good. Now it is over. What are you making for dinner?" This is exactly the right response and exactly why Dorothy has been my friend for 40 years. I did not pursue civil damages. Raymond advised me that I had grounds, and I listened to his advice, and I decided not to pursue them. This is a decision I have thought about and made peace with. The criminal conviction was the accountability the situation required. Extracting money from Portia, who is, after all, the mother of my grandchildren, would not give me anything I needed that the conviction did not already provide. My grandchildren are the reason I want to address this decision directly. Portia and Marcus have a daughter named Cora, who is 6, and a son named James, who is 4. They are my grandchildren, and I love them. And whatever their mother did, and whatever my son allowed to happen, they are not responsible for it, and the consequences of the situation should fall as lightly as possible on them. I think about what they will understand when they are older. I think about whether someone will tell them what happened and what they will make of it. I think about Cora at 16, reading some account of this and what I would want her to take from it. I would want her to understand. Your grandmother did not accept what was done to her, not because she was angry, not because she wanted to punish anyone, but because accepting it would have been accepting the premise that she was too old, too diminished, too alone to protect what she had built. The premise was wrong. The not accepting was the correct response to the wrong premise. I would also want her to understand. Your grandmother does not hold the wrongness of what was done against the people who did not do it. Cora did not throw the suitcase on the lawn. James did not forge the document. The children receive my love without condition. Cora calls me Grandma Adele. She draws me pictures of gardens because she knows I garden. James brings me rocks he finds interesting, which is the kind of gift that only a 4-year-old gives, and that I treasure in the specific way you treasure things that are entirely sincere. These things exist alongside what happened. They are not in contradiction with it. Life contains both things simultaneously, and the capacity to hold both without requiring one to cancel the other is one of the things that 67 years teaches you if you pay attention. Marcus and I have had the conversations that the situation required. Not one conversation, several over many months, with the specific patience that difficult truths require when they are being fully processed rather than managed. The first conversation 2 weeks after the December morning was the one I had been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. We sat at my kitchen table in the apartment, the same kitchen table that had been at 1847 Camellia Avenue for 20 years, and that I had brought with me when I moved. And Marcus said the things that Marcus said, which were true and adequate and insufficient all at once. He said he had known about the contractor conversations. He said he had not known about the forged document. He said he had told himself that whatever Portia was planning was legal, because he had not asked and therefore had maintained a kind of technical ignorance that he had used to avoid responsibility. He said he knew when he said it that this was not a defensible position. I said, "You let her use the not asking as protection. You knew something was wrong, and you protected yourself from knowing how wrong. That's not innocence, Marcus. That's a choice." He said, "Yes." He said it without argument, which told me something. A man who says yes to that accusation without argument is a man who has already arrived at the same conclusion and is no longer trying to avoid it. We talked about Thomas. We talked about what Thomas would have said, which is something Marcus and I have always talked about when we need a reference point that is outside our own perspective. Thomas had the clearest moral vision of anyone I have ever known. Not rigid, not judgmental, but clear. The kind of clarity that comes from 30 years of teaching young people and knowing that everything you do is being observed and understood, even when you think it isn't. Marcus said, "Dad would have been so disappointed in me." "Yes," I said, "he would have, but he also would have expected you to do better from here. That's what Thomas did with people. He expected better, and then he waited for it. We are in the process of doing better. I say this not as a comfortable ending, but as an accurate description of where things are in process. Marcus calls on Tuesdays and Saturdays. The conversations have a different quality now, more honest, less managed, with less of the specific careful navigation around the things neither of us was saying. The things we were not saying have now been said, and what remains is the conversation that was always underneath them. I do not know what will happen with Portia. Their marriage is their business. I have told Marcus this clearly. I am not asking him to make choices about his marriage on my behalf. I am asking him to be honest with me going forward, and I am asking him to protect our grandchildren from the specific costs of adult decisions they did not make. And I am asking him to be the man Thomas raised him to be. He is working on it. I believe him. I may be old, but I am not foolish. I know the difference between a man working on becoming better and a man performing the appearance of it. Marcus is working on it. The house at 1847 Camellia Avenue is still standing. I want to say this first, because it is the most important fact of the account. The house is still standing. The demolition crew went home. The cameras recorded everything. The police arrived at 5:19 a.m. The house stood through it all, the way it has stood through 38 years of everything else. I visit it on the last Sunday of every month, not to tend it. I have a property management company that handles the maintenance, but to be in it, to walk through the rooms that Thomas and I filled with our life, to stand in the kitchen that he renovated 3 times, and that is finally on the third attempt, exactly what it should be. To sit in the garden where the summer's growth has died, back to the roots that will produce again in spring. And the house is currently rented to a family, a young couple with 2 small children who use the backyard the way Thomas and I used it, for the Sunday mornings and the coffee and the specific quiet of a life with its rhythms established. I am glad the house is being lived in. Houses need to be lived in. I live in the apartment on the east side. It is smaller than 1847 Camellia Avenue, and it suits my current life in a way that the larger house, with its 3 bedrooms and its 38 years of accumulated presence, does not quite suit it anymore. I do not say this with sadness. I say it with the honest acceptance of a woman who understands that life changes shape, and the shape it takes in the later years is not necessarily smaller than what came before. It is just different, more concentrated, more specific. A garden on the apartment's small balcony, tomatoes in pots, herbs in a window box. The pecan tree I cannot have, but I can have basil and rosemary, and the specific satisfaction of growing something where it was not supposed to grow. Cora and James visit on the first Saturday of every month. Cora helps me water the balcony plants. James brings rocks. We make lunch together, which in practice means I make lunch while Cora stands at the counter and tells me everything that has happened since her last visit, and James rearranges the rocks he has brought into configurations of his own devising on the kitchen floor. These are the mornings that are the point, not the December morning. That morning was necessary, but it was not the point. These mornings, the basil, the rocks, in the Cora at the counter talking about her week, these are what the December morning was protecting. I want to say something about justice, because the story's title is about justice, and I want to be honest about what justice actually is from the inside of it. Justice is not triumphant. At least, it is not triumphant in the way that it is described from the outside. From the inside, justice at 5 a.m. looks like a cold driveway and 2 patrol cars and your daughter-in-law getting into the back of a vehicle and your 71-year-old attorney standing beside you with his briefcase while December tries to freeze the both of you. It looks like 3 weeks of investigation and 8 months of legal process and a plea agreement that is adequate but not satisfying in any emotional sense. What justice actually is, from the inside, the specific relief of not having accepted the wrong thing, the relief of having said, with every tool available to you, the camera system, the attorney, the notarized statement, the direct police link, the decision to drive to the house at 5 a.m. I did not accept this. I am not going to accept this. What was attempted here is not going to succeed. The not accepting is the point, not the conviction, not the suspended sentence, not the consequences that arrived for Portia. The not accepting is the point. My kindness was never a doormat for anyone to wipe their feet on. I said this to Raymond the morning after the hearing at which Portia entered her plea, when he called to tell me the terms. I said, "Raymond, I want you to know that I am not a woman who wanted this outcome for its own sake. I wanted it because the alternative was accepting that I was what she had decided I was, an old woman to be maneuvered and managed and displaced from what I had built." Raymond said, "I know that, Adele. I have known it for 30 years. Justice never sleeps, not even at 5 a.m. This is the title's promise, and I want to fulfill it honestly. Justice is available at 5 a.m., but it requires preparation. It requires the cameras installed in advance, and the attorney on the standing call list, and the notarized statement, and the deed in the right name, and the willingness to get in the car in December dark and drive to what is yours. It requires that you know what is yours and that you are prepared to defend it. I knew. I was prepared. The house is still standing. Thomas would have approved. I want to close this account with something I have been sitting with since the December morning, because it seems to me the most important thing and the thing most worth saying. I am 67 years old. I am a widow. I live alone in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Winston-Salem. I garden on a balcony. I go to church on Sundays. I visit the house at 1847 Camellia Avenue on the last Sunday of every month. I see my grandchildren on the first Saturday. I talk to Marcus on Tuesdays and Saturdays. I talk to Raymond Park approximately once a quarter about various matters, and the conversations are always useful. None of these things require that I be anything other than what I am. They do not require that I be younger, or less widowed, or less alone, or less 67. They require only that I be present, which I am, and that I be clear about what I have and what I am prepared to do to protect it, which I also am. The specific mistake that Portia made, and I want to name it precisely, because it is the mistake that gets made most often, and it is worth naming, is the mistake of confusing age with diminishment. She looked at a 67-year-old woman living alone in a house, and she saw a category, elderly widow, alone, possibly confused by grief, probably manageable. She did not look at the specific person in that category. She looked at the category and she made her plans based on the category rather than on me. I am not a category. I am Adele Christine Fontaine, and I have been a nurse for 35 years, and a wife for 33 years, and a mother for 42 years, and a property owner for 38 years. Or I have managed a household through a death, and through grief, and through the specific recalibration that follows major loss. I have installed a security system, and retained an attorney, and filed a notarized statement of competence, and driven to my own house in December dark at 5:20 in the morning. Did they really think I had become that senile? The answer, I now believe, is that they did not think about me at all. They thought about the category, and the category was manageable, and so they proceeded. This is perhaps more insulting than deliberate malice would have been. Deliberate malice at least acknowledges the personhood of the target. The category thinking that Portia engaged in did not see me as a person. It saw me as an obstacle that could be circumvented. I was not circumvented. I may be old. I may be alone. I may be living in a 2-bedroom apartment instead of the house where I raised my son and spent 32 years of a marriage. None of these things make me a person who can be evicted from her own history. The house at 1847 Camellia Avenue is still standing because 38 years of work and love and the specific discipline of 2 people who decided that without would not be their permanent condition cannot be demolished at 5 a.m. by someone who has confused the arithmetic of what a house is worth with the arithmetic of what a life is worth. They are not the same arithmetic. I know the difference. Justice never sleeps, not even at 5 a.m. The system that was waiting in the dark, The cameras, the sensors, the monitoring service, the attorney's number on the standing call list, the direct police link, the notarized statement was justice in its preparatory form, waiting to be activated. It was activated. It worked. The house is still standing. Thomas would have approved. I want to say one final thing, and then I will close this account. The morning after the hearing at which Portia entered her plea, I went to 1847 Camellia Avenue. Not on my regular last Sunday visit. A Tuesday morning, unscheduled, because I needed to stand in front of the house and look at it standing. It was standing. The walls were intact. The kitchen that Thomas renovated 3 times was intact. The backyard garden was dormant in the way that December gardens are dormant. The roots still alive under the cold ground. The summer's growth compressed into the seeds that will produce again in spring. I stood on the sidewalk in front of the house for probably 10 minutes. A neighbor, a woman named Mrs. Chen, who has lived next door since 2007, came out to check the mail and saw me and waved. I waved back. She came over. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "everything is all right. I just needed to see the house." She nodded. She had probably heard something about what had happened. Winston-Salem is not a small city, but it is not an anonymous one. And the kind of thing that happened in December tends to travel. "It's a good house," she said. "Yes," I said, "it is." She went back inside. I stood on the sidewalk a while longer. Then I got in my car and I drove to Dorothy's house, and we had coffee and talked about her daughter's upcoming wedding and the specific challenges of choosing a venue. And then I drove home to my apartment and made dinner and called Marcus and talked about his week. This is what the house being still standing looks like from the inside. An ordinary Tuesday. Coffee with Dorothy. A phone call with Marcus. Dinner made in my own kitchen in my apartment on the east side of Winston-Salem. The house is still standing. Thomas would have approved.